Listen and repeat. Chapter 1. Birth of Nelson Mandela. Mandela was born on July 18, 1918 in the village of Mvetzu in the Omatata district of Transke in South Africa, called Rolihlahla, meaning to pull branches out of trees. And in later years he became known as his clan, Madiba, one of his ancestors on his father's side. Nongoka was the ruler of the Tempo people in the Transke lands of the modern Eastern Cape province in South Africa. This king has a son named Mandela who is Nelson's grandfather, and the source of his title, because Mandela was only the king's child from a wife of the Axiba clan or the so-called left branch, so he was not qualified to inherit the throne. But he was considered an advisor to the royal heirs. Yet his father Gadla Henri Mvekaniswa was a local leader, an advisor to the king who was appointed to the post in 1915, after a white council of governors accused his predecessor of corruption. In 1926, Gadla was also removed from office on corruption charges, and lost his job for standing against the council's unreasonable demands. Gadla was married to 4 women, had 4 sons and 9 daughters living in different villages, and Nelson's mother, Nasika Vani, was the 3rd wife. The daughter of Nakdama of the right branch and a member of the Amamfo of the Kousa clan. In the early years of Mandela, his life was dominated by customs, rituals and taboos. He herded cattle. His parents were illiterate. But his mother, who converted to Christianity, sent him to the local Methodist school is Nelson as his first name. When Mandela was 9 years old, his father came to live with them in Kono, where he died of lung disease. Mandela said that he inherited from his father, proudly rebellion, and a stubborn sense of justice. His mother took him to the palace of the Great Place in Makisubi, where he was under the care of the guard of the Tempo show, the leader Yongintaba Dalandibo, and never saw his mother again for many years. Mandela saw that Yongintaba and his wife treated him like their 2 children, his son Justice and his daughter Nomavo. Mandela frequented the church every Sunday with the guardians, until Christianity had a special place in his life. He attended the Methodist school located next to the palace, where he studied English, history and geography and loved African history. By listening to the tales of elderly visitors to the palace, and was influenced by the anti-imperialist rhetoric of the leader Joyi, and at that time the European colonists were benevolent and not unjust. At the age of 16, he traveled with Justice and several other boys to Taihalar to undergo the ritual of circumcision, a symbol of their transition from childhood to manhood, and after completing the ritual, he was called Dalibhunga. Mandela began his high school at the Clarkbury Institute, considered the largest school for black Africans in Timboland, and encouraged the existing mixing of students on an equal footing, and after being closed by nature, he built a distinctive friendship with a girl for the first time, began exercising and loving gardens, and completed the certificate in 2 years. Chapter 2. Clarkbury Boarding Institute. In 1937 he moved to Methodist College in Fort Beaufort. Mandela's interest was to study native African culture, and he took the first friend from outside Kousa, speaking the Soto language, and was influenced by one of his best teachers. A man from Kousa broke one of her taboos by marrying a woman from Soto. Mandela was spending some of his free time boxing and running long distances, and in the second year Mandela became conservative. With the support of Yongintaba, Mandela began preparing for the Bachelor of Arts at the University of Fort Hare, an elite black university, where he studied English, anthropology and politics, local administration and Dutch Roman law in the first year. Desiring to become a translator or clerk in the Ministry of Local Affairs, Mandela continued his interests in sports and studied dance. Also distinguished himself in acting in a dramatic play about Abraham Lincoln, became a member of the Christian Students Association, presented Bible classes to the local community, and became an outspoken advocate of the British war effort when World War II broke out. He had friends in contact with the ANC and the anti-imperialist movement, but Mandela avoided getting involved in them, receiving help from the first-year Student Housing Committee which dominated his subsequent years. Chapter 3. Law Studies. At the end of the first year, he became involved in the Student Council's boycott of food because of its quality, and thus he was temporarily suspended from the university, leaving without obtaining a degree from it. When Mandela returned to Mvetzu in December 1940, Mandela found Yongintaba had arranged for him and Eustace, and they fled in panic to Johannesburg via Queenstown, which they had reached.
In April 1941, Mandela got a job as a night watchman in mines, where it was the first dealing with capitalism in South Africa, but he was expelled when the Mukhtar discovered that he was on the run. He stayed with his cousin in the town of George Gooch, where he introduced Mandela to the ANC activist. The latter secured him a job as a clerk under training in a law firm of a company, the director of which was a Jewish person sympathetic to the cause of the ANC.
Chapter 4. Revolutionary Activity Against Racism.
In August 1943, Mandela marched to support a successful bus boycott, protesting the rise in wages. He continued his higher education, enrolled Mandela at the University of South Africa by correspondence, and worked on a bachelor's degree at night. With his small salary, Mandela rented a room in the Homa family home in Alexandra, despite sinking into poverty, crime, and pollution. Alexandra has always remained a cherished place for him. Embarrassed by his poverty, he briefly courted a woman from Swaziland before failing to approach the daughter of the family who added him. The desire to save money and get closer to downtown Johannesburg, Mandela moved to the Indigenous Workers Association complex in Watersrand, where he lived among miners from different tribes, and the boat was the road stop for visits by leaders, and he once met Queen Breejan of Basutoland. In late 1941, Yongintaba visited Mandela and forgave him for his escape. Upon her return to Timboland, she died in the winter of 1942. Mandela and Justice returned to attend the funeral, arriving late in the day after passing their bachelor's exams in early 1943. Mandela returned to Johannesburg to pursue his political career as a lawyer rather than a clerk in Patembaland's office. He later stated that he had not experienced a state of transfiguration, but I simply found myself doing it, unable to do anything else. At Sigelo's home, Mandela met Bivlin Moss, an ANC activist and nurse from Nkobo, Transke. They married on October 5, 1944 and initially lived for a while with her parents, before renting and moving to 8115 in Orlando as early as 1946. Their first child, Madiba Thembi Thembakile, was born. In February 1946, they had a daughter named Makazawe in 1947, but she died 9 months later of meningitis. Mandela enjoyed his home life, inviting his mother and sister Libby to stay with him. In early 1947, he had spent 3 years as a clerk at Witkin, Seidelsky and Edelman, and decided to become a full-time student and live on loans from the Bantu Welfare Trust. In July 1947, Mandela rushed his boss to the hospital, where he died, and was succeeded at the head of ANCYL by a more moderate president, Peter Mda, who agreed to cooperate with communists and non-blacks, and appointed Mandela as secretary. Mandela disagreed with Peter Mda's approach. In December 1947, supported a failed measure to expel the communists from the ANCYL, considering their ideology non-African.
In 1947, Mandela was elected to the ANC Executive Committee in Transvaal, under the leadership of Regional President C.S. Ramoanoy. When Ramoanoy acted against the wishes of the Transvaal Executive Committee and collaborated with Indians and communists, Mandela was one of those who forced him to resign. Mandela took Kousa's place as chairman of the NCP's executive body in March 1950. That month, an agreement to defend freedom of expression was held in Johannesburg, bringing together African, Indian and communist activists to call for a general strike against apartheid. Mandela opposed the strike because it was not led by the ANC, but a large group of black workers took part. The result was an increase in police repression and the inclusion of the Communist Suppression Act, 1950, which touched the actions of all protest groups. Chapter 5. Mandela was elected president of the Transvaal branch of the Congress Party. Mandela was elected president of the ANCYL in 1950, at the National Party Congress in December 1951. He continued to argue against the United Front against racism but then lost the election, changed his entire outlook, and acknowledged the approach of the ANCLE, influenced by his friends such as Moses Coton, and by the Soviet Union's support for wars of national liberation. Mandela broke his bad view of communism as well. He became influenced by the texts of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, and Mao Zedong, and believed in dialectical materialism. In April 1952, Mandela began working at Bassner law firm, and it was to increase his commitment to work and struggle that reduced the time he spent with his family. In 1952, the ANC began preparing to join a campaign to challenge apartheid with Indian and communist groups, and the National Volunteer Council was established to recruit volunteers. The decision to resist non-violence was influenced by the movement of Mahatma Gandhi, which was seen by some as a moral choice, while Mandela considered it realistic. At the Durban rally on June 22, Mandela addressed a crowd of 10,000 people that marked the start of the protest campaign, for which he was arrested and briefly detained in Marshall Square Jail. As the protests increased, the number of ANC affiliates grew from 20,000 to 100,000. The government responded to the protests with mass arrests and the passage of a public safety law in 1953 to allow martial law to be applied. In May, authorities banned the head of the Innu in Transvaal, Mr. J.B. Marks, from appearing in public. Sensing that he could not maintain his position, he recommended Mandela as his successor. Mandela was elected regional president in October, despite opposition from the ultra-Africanist Bafokeng group to his candidacy. On July 30, 1952, Mandela was arrested under the title of the Communist Suppression Act and put on trial with 21 defendants, including Morocco, Sisulu and Dado, in Johannesburg. They were sentenced for systemic communism to a sentence of 9 months hard labor, suspended for 2 years. In December, Mandela was banned, for 6 months, from attending meetings or speaking with more than one person at a time, making his presidency of the Innu in the Transvaal impractical. The protest campaign has faded. In September 1953, Andrew Cunin read Mandela's speech entitled, "No Easy Walk to Freedom," at an ANC rally in Transvaal. The title was quoted from Indian independence leader Jawaharlal Nehru, who influenced Mandela's thought. The speech led to a contingency plan in case the ANC is banned. This Mandela Plan, or M-Plan, involved dividing the organization into more centrally led cells. Although Mandela had a second daughter, Makaziwa Phumia, in May 1954, his relationship with Evelyn became strained, and she accused him of adultery. Referring to ties with Liliane Nguye, a member of the African Congress Party, and another with Secretary Ruth Mombati. Persistent but unproven allegations speak of the birth of a child to a handkerchief from these relationships. Disgusted by her son's behavior, his mother Nozakeni returned to Transke, while Evelyn joined Jehovah's Witnesses and rejected Mandela's obsession with politics. Mandela has reached a perception of the ANC that there is no substitute for armed and violent resistance. After taking part in the failed protest to prevent the demolition of the black suburb of Sophiatown, Johannesburg. Chapter 6. Mandela's Arrest and Trial. In February 1955, he advised Sisulu to request weapons from the People's Republic of China, but the Chinese government believed that the movement was unwilling to wage a guerrilla war against the apartheid regime. With the participation of the South African Indian Council, the Council of Colours, the South African Congress of Trade Unions and the Congress of Democrats, the ANC attended the People's Congress, calling on all South Africans to send proposals for a post-apartheid era. Based on the responses, Rosti Bernstein drafted the Freedom Charter, calling for the creation of a democratic, non-racist state with the nationalization of key industries. When the charter was adopted at the June 1955 conference in Kliptown with 3,000 commissioners, police stormed the scene, though it remained an important part of Mandela's ideology. After the end of the second ban in September 1955, Mandela went on a working day off to Transke to discuss the implications of the Bantu Powers Act 1951 with local tribal leaders. He also took the opportunity to visit his mother and New England before returning to Cape Town. In March 1956, he received a third ban on public appearances, confined to Johannesburg for 5 years, but which he often challenged. His marriage was shattered when Evelyn left home with their children to live with her brother. She initiated divorce proceedings in May 1956, claiming that Mandela was physically abusing her, which Mandela denied, and the conflict between them over child custody intensified. Evelyn withdrew the separation petition in November, but Mandela went ahead with divorce proceedings in January 1958, which ended in a divorce in March with the return of custody of their mother Evelyn. During the divorce proceedings, a relationship developed between him and social worker Winnie Madikizela. They married on June 14, 1958 in Baisana. Winnie later became involved in ANC activities and spent several weeks in prison. On August 5, 1962, police arrested Mandela along with Cecil Williams near Howick. He was imprisoned in Johannesburg's Marshall Square prison and charged with inciting labor strikes and leaving the country without permission. Mandela represented himself and took Slovo as legal counsel, seeking to use the trial as a demonstration of the ANC's moral struggle against racism, while his supporters demonstrated outside the court. Mandela was taken to Pretoria, where Leweni could visit him, and in his cell he began studying by correspondence to prepare for a LLB from the University of London. The hearing began on October 15, during which Mandela went on strike over his wearing of traditional crossover, refusing to call any witnesses, and turning his case into political speech. The court found Mandela guilty, sentenced him to 5 years in prison, and as he left the courtroom, his supporters sang the song, Nkosi Sikelel I Africa. On July 11, 1963, police raided Jelalev's farm and arrested those they found there, discovering papers documenting MK's activities, some of which mentioned Mandela. The Rivonia trial later began in the Pretoria High Court on the 9th of October, and Mandela and his associates were charged with 4 counts of sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government with violence. Percy Yotar was the chief prosecutor, who called for the death penalty for the defendants. Judge Cortis de Wet quickly dropped the charges for lack of evidence, but Yotar recast the charges and reintroduced the case between December and February 1964, inviting 173 witnesses and presenting thousands of documents and photographs to trial. Chapter 7. Presidential elections. Mandela as President of South Africa. Elections of the 27th of April 1994, the ANC prepared an election campaign during which it opened 100 offices and was hired by Chancellor Stanley Greenberg. Greenberg ran the People's Forums Foundation in all the places where Mandela could appear and address the poor across the state and its periphery. Mandela was a popular and important figure among blacks in South Africa. The Congress Party campaigned around a reconstruction and development program to build 1 million homes over 5 years, include universal free education and expand access to water and electricity. The South African press opposed Mandela's election for fear of continuing ethnic strife and supported the NDP instead. The party's slogan was, "A better life for all," but it did not elaborate on how the projects would be funded. With the exception of the Weekly Mail and the New Nation, Mandela devoted much time to fundraising for the ANC, traveling North America, Europe and Asia, seeking wealthy donors, including supporters of the apartheid regime. It also urged that the voting age be lowered from 18 to 14 years. Mandela realized that COSAG was interested in undermining the election, especially in the aftermath of the Battle of Bop and the Shell House Massacre. Chapter 8. National Reconciliation and Incidents of Violence between AWB and Omatata. One after another, he met with African politicians and generals, including P.W. Botha, Pick Botha and Philgon Constant, to persuade them to work within a democratic system. De Klerk worked to persuade Inkatha Buthelezi to enter the election rather than wage a separatist war. De Klerk and Mandela then appeared as leaders of the two main parties in a televised debate. Although de Klerk was considered the best speaker at the event by the majority of viewers, Mandela's offer of a handshake was surprising, leading some commentators to consider it a victory for Mandela. The election went ahead despite some violence, such as an AWB car bomb that killed 20 people. Mandela cast his vote in Olange at a high school in Durban, and although he was elected president, he publicly accepted that the election was marred by fraud and vandalism. The ANC also won in 7 out of 9 provinces. The NDP won 1 and the other Wonkatha. With 62% of the vote at the national level, the ANC came very close to the 2/3 majority needed to change the constitution. Chapter 9. Death of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela died on the 5th of December 2013 surrounded by his family at his home in Johannesburg from a long-suffering lung infection. Nelson died around 2050 local time, UTC+2. His death was announced by South African President Jacob Zuma in a statement saying, "My compatriot is South Africa. We have united Nelson Mandela and we will bid him farewell." He declared 10 days of mourning in the country. Mandela had a state funeral attended by 90 official representatives of several countries and organizations in a solemn gathering where a number of leaders circulated on the podium to mourn the deceased. The ceremony took place on the 10th of December 2013 at Soccer City Stadium in Johannesburg. This stadium was the scene of Mandela's last public appearance during the 2010 FIFA World Cup. The burial ceremony was held in Kono, his hometown, in the presence of members of his family and the country's leaders, and 10 days of memorial services concluded.